Okay. Welcome everyone to the Brooklyn Rail's 274th New Social Environment. I'm Catherine, Director of Ads here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure of being your MC today for a conversation between Ellen Altfest and Toby Kamps. We're also thrilled to be virtually joined by poet Forrest Gander, who has generously pre-recorded a special poetry reading just for us to close today's program. And finally, we start all of our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in Brooklyn, we are on the unceded land and waters of Lenape-Hoking, which still belongs to the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second acknowledgement is that Black Lives Matter. We recognize the legacy of white settler colonialism as a part of the many contemporary expressions of white supremacy, and we honor those that have lost their lives to this violence. I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions as we do our part in learning and unlearning required to undo this legacy of injustice. And now to briefly introduce today's guest and host, artist Ellen Altfest has developed her own distinct and devoted approach to figurative and representational painting. Altfest always paints from life, drawn towards domestic plants, vegetables, and more recently, male models. She lives and works in New York, and today I believe is joining us from Connecticut. And our host today, Toby Kamps, is the Director of External Projects at White Cube Gallery and is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. Toby, take it away. Oh, Toby, I believe you're,
yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that great introduction, and thanks to the Rail team for organizing this event, and also many thanks to Ellen Altfest for participating. Catherine gave a great short introduction, and I will do something very, very short too, but we have a brand new video hot off the presses that I think itself is a very good introduction to Ellen's work and her working method. But just quickly, I'll tell you that Ellen received her MFA from Yale in 1997 and also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine in 2002. She's had solo exhibitions at the Chinati Foundation in Marfa, Texas, the New Museum, MK Gallery in Milton Keynes here in the UK, and at White Cube, where I work and where she'll be opening a new online exhibition of watercolors entitled Nature on Friday. Ellen also received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2012 and exhibited at the Venice Biennale in 2013. As Catherine said, her work is grounded in an intense observation from life and is exquisitely rendered and is deeply engaged with a kind of revelatory realism on a meticulous one-to-one scale. And if we could tee up the new video, I think this is a great introduction to her process.
Toby, I'm having a tech issue here, so maybe while I tee that up, if you maybe want to keep going.
Why don't we? I think green shapes might be a good substitution for this. Then the other shorter video.
I noticed the green shapes on the way back from the oil painting I'm working on in the woods. So I'd seen all these green spots, but I look at them as compositions, and the way that each spot was in relationship in proximity to other spots on trees wasn't as interesting as these particular four shapes. There's some sort of interdependence between them, how they're all almost one thing. They're so close together, but then they're four separate shapes. And I found that interesting. I made a mental note that that would be something I would paint someday.
So, Ellen, could you talk about that scenario and what you were doing in the woods, and how you were making, in that case, a watercolor. There's also a painting of the same title. Could you talk about what exactly you were doing there?
Yeah, first I wanted to thank everyone. I'm so happy to be here talking to you in the Rail. What I was doing there is I kind of set up a studio in the woods, so I'm surrounded by everything I need. I leave all my materials outside pretty much, and I set up. I set up this watercolor, and so I kind of, everything is 1-to-1 scale. So I was actually, one of my models told me about the skewer technique, where you measure with a skewer, but usually people just hold the skewer out as a straight line. But I actually, since it's 1-to-1 scale, I just sort of copy the actual dimensions of the thing I'm painting with the skewer. So.
Oh, so you put your finger to indicate a length, so you're able to transcribe it then from the thing, the real thing, to the paper. I see. I thought it was for perspective and. Okay.
That is generally what it is, but I'm a little bit perspective. I also have separately perspectival issues where I don't fully grasp perspective. So whatever I do, I don't incorporate, I mean, this is getting into the weeds, but I don't incorporate the turning of my head or all the different things you could do when you're measuring that would make it more accurate. It's somehow it's kind of accurately inaccurate, I guess, in some ways.
In the studio, you use pins, glass-headed pins, to mark your place on a intricate piece of textile or something. And on your male models, you often use moles and different things as reference points. Is that? I
try to find like some sort of landmark. It's in some ways it's challenging to paint outside because I can't make a mark on the tree. So I always have like a primary reference point, like something very noticeable within the tree that I go back to and I measure everything against. But I guess the one of the greater challenges is getting lost especially as you're getting more and more into it, and having to locate your place without any type of landmark. So that's kind of like a painterly struggle, I guess, in some ways.
Let's go to the first slide and keep talking about this. Is an early work from 2004, but Ellen, in this video we were going to show, you set up a little encampment down to a kind of a platform. There's an umbrella, there's a working stool, I think, and then there's a chair for stepping back and looking at the image. And it looks like you set up camp there for months and months. How long did it take you to do Green Shapes?
I would say setup? I started it in the middle of October, and I worked on it through December, like until it started. I almost would prefer not to completely keep track, but probably I worked on it until the end of December. I mean, if it gets freezing, then you can't do the watercolor. So that's a limit. That's a kind of a good limitation in a way, because who really wants to be out there when it's freezing? And then I took it up again on the warmer days. So probably like about 2.5, 3 months.
Wow. And did you ever figure out what the green shape was?
It's like, I think it's like I'm really fascinated by this kind of like powdery, like algae lichen mixture. It has a luminosity. It almost looks like paint on the tree. So it's I kind of think of that. I don't know if we have an image of that watercolor, but I kind of think of that as a kind of like a painting about a painting. Like it's almost like I came upon that thing outside, and I chose it because it was already a composite, a painting or a composition. So so it's sort of like, I think that my more recent work, it's so close, and it kind of has this, it's almost like I found an abstract painting and I made a painting of it. That's a different painting, but it's a similar principle. So my more recent work is sort of more abstract. I mean, this one you can't even really see unless you zoom in on it, which we might be able to do. But the watercolor is maybe a little further along in the PowerPoint.
Thanks, Ellen. When we started we had a preliminary conversation, and I confessed to Ellen that I have had in the past a kind of allergy to work that takes a super long time to make. And I will fully admit this might be some kind of reverse Adlerian compensatory striving for my kind of slow desk-bound job. And I guess I've always looked to artists to kind of move fast and make stuff up. But your work is next level and has really changed my whole perspective on this. And you've said, in fact, that several times that you want your paintings to become the thing itself. And what does that mean for you, Ellen?
I guess I guess I have different impulses. Like I do, it does, like you see it until it does. Like the more you look at it, as soon as an artist, I don't know if it's not just me, as soon as an artist sees the canvas, when it's blank, it's the canvas. And then, when you start working on it, you're seeing the thing that you're going to make in a way. And then you work on it until it becomes that thing. And there are different criteria. I feel like, there's like trying to recognize something in nature, like for example, and that it has a certain quality that might not be, it's not a matter of fact thing, like it looks a certain way. It's more like it has a certain quality. So on one hand, I'm trying to capture the quality of the thing I'm painting that's kind of almost an intangible. On the, I am in some ways trying to make it, look like the thing, or, en route to capturing that quality. And then I'm also like trying to have a quality of my own, so I'm looking for a certain thing that makes it mine. And then I'm looking at the painting to see if the painting succeeds on its own terms, apart from whether it looks like the thing or has the quality of the thing, but does it have its own quality? So those are probably like the criteria that I'm after when I'm making a painting.
This goes beyond, though, the kind of estrangement or something of stoned thinking, where you stare at something so long it starts to look like something else, or you do this. This is sort of uncanny and wonderful in my take on things. And it's that you've taken your subjects and kind of put them through your head and out your hands, is to me really remarkable. And I wonder if you could kind of talk about how you choose your subjects and kind of set about making an image of them.
I mean, I think different times in my career, I've had different impulses. Like, for example, with this, I mean, I really like the way the subject and the background were fused together, because then it's like the way an image, the whole image is united by these two things being fused. It's not just like a figure with the ground behind it. Like, sometimes it can be like, oh, I like this plant, but that doesn't make it an interesting painting. That makes it a painting of an interesting plant. So that was, but at the same time, I had some sort of like anthropomorphic impulses. So I recognized that the plant and my hair and everything had a similar quality. So I did see it in that way as like a self-portrait. But now I think my impulses are veering towards things that are more like finding things in nature that have a more formal aspect, like would be a successful, you know, the way the forms interact would be a successful painting. And I think that there's less of a direct anthropomorphism and more of like some sort of almost spiritual quality, or I don't know, that's a big word, but like something else, some other quality coming through that maybe I'm not even aware of in the beginning, but kind of emerges after so much work on it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, well, let's sort of unpack this for just a moment, because I do want to come back to the spiritual aspect. We had a very funny discovery about you attending Camp Walt Whitman as a kid in New Hampshire, and so, but
I was also interested in your biases towards like against labor-intensive work. I think we like drilled down because like the examples you gave were all like, which I won't name, and which were all kind of like making work as like putting in a lot of labor as the point of the work when the labor wasn't necessary outside of its own thing. But I think that like I think people do have a preference either to have something that's kind of more expulsive or like, you know, as, which I enjoy also, or something, you know, like my work is very intense, and that can be, you know, there's definitely an intensity, and maybe there is a preference for, or, you know, against that, you know, any specific type of work, which I find like our internal biases when we look at work sort of interesting, you know, in a way. But.
Yeah, and, you know, I feel like, you know, research-based work or things involving overhead projectors and one-for-one transcription and a certain kind of photorealism too. You know, it's sort of like, why bother? The camera can do it. And this, again, this is my fantasy. I feel sort of, I have to be, what I do, it seems to me to take a really long time, and I'm looking for artists who are kind of moving fast and have a kind of freedom, and things should come to them in flashes and stuff. But again, there's a kind of uncanniness to your work that is really, I'm singing a different tune now. I
like to challenge that, but I'm totally not into photorealism in that for that reason also, you know, because it seems like a skill more than but I mean, I always get into trouble if I talk about, I'm sure that there's a photorealist that I do enjoy, you know, like I don't want to condemn all photorealism, but yeah.
But by the same token, I'm absolutely fascinated with realism, and realism obviously has many, many forms and serves many different purposes. And I'm sure you've thought about this, but how would you describe your realism? Can you sum it up?
I don't know if I can sum up. I mean, I was thinking more after talking to you initially about realism, and I think that even I've never, you know, no artist really wants to be labeled, but I think that I guess realism might be something that has some sort of like dispassionate accuracy to it, whereas I think that what I make is not quite that. It definitely, if someone asked me, you know, who hadn't seen my work, that's always the test of how you communicate what you're doing to them. But like, and so I might use the word realism because it looks like the thing, but at the same time, it doesn't have that kind of clinical it's something more subjective. I've always been looking for something very subjective, both in terms of the subjects I choose, the way I compose them, the way I paint them, which it hopefully has its own quality that's my own. So I guess I hadn't thought about it that much, but I guess I would move away from realism, but I'm not entirely sure what I would replace it with.
Well, we started out speaking about perspective, and you just said that you're not, that's not your wheelhouse, but you have talked about your pictorial space, and in fact, preferring a shallow, or you even, I think, used the word claustrophobic pictorial space. Was that somebody else's words?
No, I mean, I think that this painting of the tumbleweed definitely has that kind of claustrophobia, and it was meant to be kind of like a psychological space, or that's what it seemed like. I don't know if I set out for it to be that. I think that the shallow space, I think that to me, like vistas and traditional nature painting always seemed kind of generic, you know, and I felt like if I could, focus my attention and the viewer's attention on something very specific, that that would be more, my own, rather than if I climbed to the top of a mountain and, and like made a like some sort of vista. So I think that it serves, I think I've moved away from the feeling necessary. I think that in the beginning there was a psychological claustrophobia, but I think now I'm in a different place with the work, and it doesn't have that negative, or it has an intensity, but it's not necessarily an anxiety like it used to be.
I'm very interested in you talking about the subjectivity in the work, because there's not much expressionism or kind of, I see it as a kind of a hyper-focusing, which I know is a kind of subjectivity, but that to me is fascinating. And in fact, your high school art teacher talked about, when he or she met you, they said, you've got it. And you thought, oh, this is because I'm so creative, but it was something altogether different. Can you recall that incident?
When my high school art teacher said, yeah, I don't know that like, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that my high school art teacher, saw something in me, and I felt in some ways there were people who were much more technically. I had some technical ability, but I think that it's not a facility like an illustrator, like the kids that I sort of wanted to be like in junior high school or whatever, were the kids who could draw something from memory and make it really slick, and my work was always like really sketchy and awkward at that point. And I realized that I don't have a preconceived memory of what something is. It's like, I just have to feel my way through it. And maybe that's what in some ways like separates somebody who's an illustrator, who has this whole vocabulary of things that they can draw upon, from an artist in a certain way.
Well, if I may just paraphrase your teacher, that he or she said, well, you have this intense ability to focus. Remember that? And he said, oh, I know you had it when I met you, and you thought, oh, because I was so creative, or I had this thing. And the teacher said, no, you just have this intensity of focus, which is rare. And that was, I thought, such an interesting thing. And you talk about your subjectivity in all different kinds of ways, wanting the work to be the thing itself. You say it reflects your personality. especially the parts that are off or odd. And you can see this in your cropping, your choice of subjects. There's something very sly and funny in them. But
I mean, I think that's I think that's funny what you said about my teacher. Sorry to interrupt. I mean, because I think now looking back, like you choose the person who has the drive or the, you know, like the intensity and the drive, not necessarily, you know, that's probably the thing that you look for most in terms of if that person is going to continue or, you know, proceed. So yeah, I remember him saying that now. Yeah.
Sorry, it's bedtime here and the kids are going crazy upstairs, so I keep on muting and muting. Sorry. Well, you know, it's interesting too. Let's jump back one slide and then we'll cut to this one, I promise. There's some formal similarities there too. You mentioned a Tom Friedman work that's made from a piece of paper that he stared at for 1,000 hours, and I really think that aura, that, you know, the energy invested resonates with this, and you see this with museum exhibitions by the traveling museum exhibitions. By the third stop, the curators have stopped obsessing over the layout and the placement of every work, and there's a kind of energy loss, and I see that as a strong animating force in your work. And I think of subjectivity generally as something hotter, but yours is a kind of a cooler, more observatory. Do you agree with this, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, there is an element. It's a funny mixture because I think that I have a certain amount of like dispassion or something. Also, like on one hand, I feel a real connection to what I'm painting, and then on the other hand, I have a really like cold eye. Like, I don't know, like I can tell you, I mean, I kind of see things as they are, for better or worse. Like they don't ever, even if I know somebody for 100 years, I don't know, there's just not, you know, you have an affinity, but like I feel, but I always also can see, you know, I see the whole picture of, in my opinion, from my perspective of, I see things as they are in a way, you know, and so maybe that's also not literally like in terms of trying to capture every blemish. I mean, that I don't know. It's yeah, I don't know. That seems like, yeah.
Did I read somewhere that you started out as a still life painter? I imagine many painters do.
I think that I wasn't a still life painter. I thought about that. I say that because I think I treat my subjects as still lives, but it's sort of unquantifiable. Like if you're in nature, technically you're like a plein air painter, but most like the work isn't like plein air painting in what you would think of as plein air painting wouldn't be these like configurations and close-ups of things necessarily, although it can be, you know. I mean, I've looked at a lot of plein air painting and there are some things like that, or so I kind of refer to it as still life. And I think that I think still life in general is like undervalued, which I like. I feel like it's open-ended and you can like project what you want onto it. And I feel like I connect with objects in a way that maybe other people, I don't know what other people do or don't, but like I feel like you can project what you want onto them or get what you want from them. So, you know, and I've been moved by many still lives, and I feel like they're low on the totem pole, like I've said in the past, but like I feel like the Goya still lives that he kept to himself, of like dead animals and things that he set up in still life configurations, those really dark psychological paintings are amazing, you know. And I would like to, you know, publicly ask for an exhibition of those 9 works or whatever, however many there were. So, but they're not, I think that there's a lot that can be done with still life, and that hasn't yet been done also by, you know, I think that I'm really a pro still life person, but my interpretation of it is loose, you know.
Let's jump to the next slide, and on the subject of still lives and blemishes and things like that. When did you introduce men as subjects, and why?
This painting was it. This is the painting. I mean, it's just sort of like, it was one of those things that was just nagging at me, like I wanted to do it, but I had just been painting like tumbleweeds and plants, and I didn't have a good, it's not like I had a good reason, but sometimes you feel like, okay, there's something that I need to communicate through this, and I don't even know what it is. So let me do it. And then let me see if I didn't know how it would be if people, I thought maybe there would be somebody out there being like, wait, you can't do this. Like, this isn't what you do, or, you know, which is in part one of the reasons I curated a show and put this in it, just as like testing the waters to see, like, I don't necessarily think it's good form to put your work in a show that you curate, but like, I was really curious. I was curious about many things. And one of them was to see how, you know, if people would take this in stride or what the response would be. And I was, you know, kind of bored with, I didn't want it to, my work just to be about like, oh, wow, your process is so intense. And I love how much work you put into it, because I don't necessarily feel like I should be like praised for doing a lot of work, or, you know, I think that you do the work you need to do to make the painting you need to make. And I did think that there were other things in that work outside of that. So I think that I was just forcing the issue also by putting a subject matter that, and, you know, that I felt like couldn't be ignored, you know, like this is like, you can't just talk about, oh, well, you did a lovely job with the leg hair, you know, like you can paint anything. If you could paint that leg hair, you're so great at like observing things. Like I wanted to, I'm not afraid to be to confrontational if I feel like the work needs, if I feel like that's what I need to be like in my work.
Can we jump to the next slide, the bent leg? This is an all-time great painting, I think. So you talked about a show. This was a show in 2006 at I-20 Gallery called Men. Who else was in this show? Was it all women painting men?
Yeah, it was all women painting men, because I wanted to see like if there was a female voice, if there was like a common thread among women, or I was sort of trying to learn about what I was embarking on. So it was kind of motivated by that, and try to get, you know, different women's perspectives on men. And I didn't feel like I had been seeing a lot. I mean, there was Sylvia Slee in the background, who had been doing men for a long time, but I didn't feel like there were that many. And I did feel like there was a difference between paintings of men by women and paintings of men by men. And I wanted to kind of better understand what that might be.
What was it? What were your revelations?
I think that there was a lot more ambivalence with the women, like at least the ones I curated, like that there were, you know, there was a whole range of like it wasn't necessarily like just I like men, I want to have sex with men, here's a beautiful man. Like it was like the women had like many different like perspectives. I remember like Karen Hegel was in the show, and she kind of, I remember at the time her saying that she wanted to like she identified with the man, and I don't know if it's, she was coming from a lesbian perspective, which I thought was like, I didn't expect, like, and she always painted men as well as women. And then I had shown this painting wasn't in the show. I only had one painting. It was the last painting, but I had shown the penis painting. This is like, as a curator, you must know this, is to like never show the work that's going to be in the show and then ask a person if they want to be in the show, an artist. Like, I feel like that's not good. You should just sort of like, because you shouldn't get too in the weeds with the people you want to be in the show, because they might say no because they object to something or another. But anyway, I asked Nicole Eisenman, who makes like really cool paintings of men, to be in it. And she saw that penis and she was like, no way am I going to be in a show with that painting. Like, it's like, she saw it as like some sort of like lovingly, like with a lovingly painted penis. That's what she said. And I thought that was interesting, because like, even looking at the painting now, there's always like a reverence if you spend so long on something. So even if you're sort of making fun of it, or there are all these different impulses in it, like the fact that you spent so long on it, there's a reverence to that. But I actually don't think that that's obviously the only thing going on in that. I don't think that that's a straightforward like love for a penis painting either. But it was interesting talking to her, because she was, had so much, and like thoughts about shifting the gaze, and it was a really useful conversation to have with her. And she ended up participating, but with a letter of protest from Ridiculous, which I loved, like, obviously. So
yeah, Rob Storr talks about you having a kind of oddly affecting kindness in your gaze, and he says you're somewhere between a dermatologist and a longtime partner in looking at these male bodies. What is your gaze? It's not a male gaze. Can you say what it is?
It's just mine. I just want to be like, I just want to get down into whatever is most me about singular, whatever might be singular about me and my perspective, and my likes and dislikes, and what I think about men, like, which is complicated. And so like there's going to be a range. There's going to be like that armpit, which was like much more sensual, and then the penis, which is like a little bit like has like a little bit of it. They all have a little bit of a humor to them in a way too, I feel. All the men paintings. So I don't know if it's hard to put down. Like, when Rob Storr said that it was like a lovingly, like, a lover's view of the person, like my feeling at that moment was like, I didn't really think so. Like, but at the same time, if somebody says, oh, it's just clinical and not sexual, I'll oppose. That doesn't seem right to me either. So I don't know. It's something else, something other. I don't know.
Well, let's click along to a few more images involving the male subject. And I read the Rob Storr thing. It's like a lover, but a long time lover, where the early throes of passion are ancient history, and you're kind of just like, okay, this is what I'm
dealing with.
That's what I'm dealing with. Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. And that's a new bump. Should we go to a dermatologist, or is it just a zit?
No, I don't want it to be that. That sounds so gross.
Yeah. Let's keep.
I think men have also like have complicated relationships looking at paintings of men. So I think that's. I don't know. Like, to me, the paintings aren't, if there's a mole in it or something, it's not like I want to take it to the dermatologist and remove it. It's just a landmark in, the landscape of the body,
Well, you've talked about Sylvia Slay, and she was the sort of the master of body hair, and you tend to select models with a fair amount of body hair. is the hair like the wrinkles on the bark of a tree, or is it something else? And down to the, what is it, and how do you paint it? What kind of a brush do you use?
I mean, I definitely took the hair from Sylvia. I'll give her credit where credit is due. Like, I saw that hair. I never found a model as hairy as her models, but I think I use like a tiny brush. Like, I'm starting to use, I use watercolor brushes. Like I think Raphael, like 6-0, like sable brushes are the best for what I do. I mean, maybe I overdosed on body hair, and I definitely have taken a break from the figure for quite a while, and in the way that I was painting it, like recognizable parts of the body. But I like the hair because it gendered the body, and it was important to me that it was a woman painting a man, or that it was, that was important that they were men. And I'm not like I kind of fear Raphael, like that kind of smooth beauty. Like I know that to me would be really impossible for, like, built up with like glazing and stuff. It would be impossible for me to accomplish. That's not, I mean, I admire it, but if I think about making it, it like hurts my mind. Like I like to have a lot of visual information. And that's sort of like, you had asked before about texture, and to me texture is like just like visual information. But that was like what was hard when I took on painting African American men. I kind of had to figure out, without all those landmarks of like moles and the contrast between the hair and the skin, and it was a challenge. It was, pushing me more into like modulating the form. And I had taken out like the nipples and the belly button, so it didn't have like those recognizable parts, which is sort of what I was moving away from those. But it made it, even everything had to be really right for it not to fall apart. There wasn't like to make it somehow be a body without those things.
Yeah, I will only share this story because I see Kathy Bradford is in the audience here, but I was a topless waiter at the Mr. Bowden contest at Bowden College in the deep 80s. And this was a male beauty pageant, complete with a swimsuit competition and a talent show and stuff. And we used to, friends of mine used to rent Kathy Bradford's house, and we used to have parties there. But I will say, and it's only for women except for the topless waiters. And I've never been so objectified in my life, and I kind of liked it too. I mean, it was interesting to be on the other side of the gaze like that. And so I guess I have some personal connection to this. I think back to that wild and crazy evening all those years ago.
That's funny.
Let's keep going on the slides, please. There's the green spot, which we talked about earlier. Let's keep going. This is the new work, which will be in this online exhibition opening on Friday at White Cube. And I guess this is what prompted the story too, is that here the male body is really a kind of a backdrop for little representations of, I guess, more or less natural detritus, like a piece of twine here. We can click along, please. Green plant, a spotted leaf. What is going on in these watercolors? And watercolors are made in the studio, right? I guess you do some outside, but most of them
are in the studio. Yeah, they're. I mean, I was thinking, I had let go of the men. I mean, it's funny to revisit them now, but I had, I really was enjoying. I am enjoying, making all my oil paintings now are of nature, which haven't been, you know, I don't have because they're in process, but like, I thought there are several things, like I had been painting men and then I had been painting nature. And I just thought kind of like in a kind of, you know, stupid way, like, okay, well, like, how do I bring these together, you know? And so like, I just thought I'll just make it this, like, you know, I'll put nature on the man, you know, and make a relationship that way, because in some ways they are two separate groups of work. And I really love the intensity of the nature paintings, and I feel like a sincere connection to those. But I remember having a show a couple years ago, and the director at the gallery was like, you know, don't ever, you know, lose your sense of humor, you know, like keep that I love your work, but keep that in there. And I thought that was like a really interesting piece of feedback. And it kind of, I did have that twine. That was the first one that was in the show. So she was sort of talking about that. And it made me, I do enjoy, like, there's an element of play, and you know, there's so different making something and setting something up in the studio to finding it, like literally just walking around the woods till you find something that you want to paint. And these are things like this leaf was something I found, but then I was like, what if I can, but using the moles and the stuff as like as compositional elements, like making a composition with the body. And then my husband saying, and then, you know, it's a quarantine, and who's my model but my husband, who kind of looks like one of those original models. Like I ended up, like, I didn't think that was my type or anything, but I ended up marrying somebody who has this kind of light skin and dark hair. And someone said to him, like, oh, so you're modeling for Ellen? And he doesn't even, I mean, it's hard to like get him, like it's lucky that I can paint the leaf and then paint him. Sometimes I can paint them separately because he doesn't like want to sit for, you know, more than like a couple hours a few times a week. But like, they're like, oh, so you're modeling for Ellen? And he's like, I'm not a model. He's like, I'm a tabletop, which I thought was like so true, because I sort of wanted to get rid of the men. But instead I kind of made them into like the background, you know, like I demoted the man, sort of, but I didn't get rid of the man.
Your title is so grandiose, nature.
Yeah.
And the works are small, super intimate. That's, I think, your sense of humor coming through. But when we spoke on the phone, we riffed a little bit about men and nature, and Jackson Pollock saying, I am nature.
Yeah.
And other people have noticed this too, but in a way, there's something there's some of abstract expressionism's all overness in your work, and the way that your realism is so intense and captures so much more than the eye could ever perceive in a normally moving through the world, that it becomes a kind of abstraction. And what do you think about that kind of macho movement or approach to making art?
I mean, I think that the idea of some of those paintings is something I take and incorporate into my work. Like, I'm not like literally looking at a Jackson Pollock, but sometimes I might think Jackson Pollock or something like that. I can't think of a real example in any of these slides, but I think that, but I mean, obviously I think that saying I am nature is completely grandiose, and, you know, it made sense in the 1950s, or 40s or whatever. But now I think that nature for me is just like, all these things are nature, the man, and it's like, it's making an equivalent between all these things. And which is sort of like you know, a way to restrain the male subject and unite the compositions or something.
yeah, it's interesting, and this is again, that the male subject is pushed into the role of backdrop is interesting. Maybe it's not even gendered; it's just skin with hair on it. That's a setting for your depictions of these things, but it's they are the kind of the most insignificant forest leaf litter kinds of things, and yeah, it's just why these are such humble things. Why? What appealed to you about them?
I mean, I think everything is equally interesting and uninteresting. I don't know if there's like anything in itself in a representational painting outside of like, okay, I'm going to paint the president, so that's interesting because it's the president and he's interesting. But then it's maybe not an interesting painting. It's just an interesting, I don't know. It's of interest. The painting's of interest because of the subject. But I think that I walk every day, like the equivalent of 4 blocks from my house to the painting site. And some things just come into focus. So like, I wasn't interested in leaves for all these years. And then maybe 2 years ago, it was just like, whoa, leaves, and I felt like I recognized something, and I kind of knew what I could do with them. And so now I see, I can see it's just like I could go on for like an hour, which I will not do, about all the different leaves and types of leaves, preservation of leaves, and I literally want to make a painting of each of these leaves. And now I just have like thousands of leaves, which is becoming like a leaf hoarding problem. Like, how am I gonna, now I have to, I was able to not deal with them because I was making the watercolor show, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to organize these leaves so I can use them? But I get attached to each leaf is pretty amazing, but it's also about having in your mind's eye, what I can do with it. The moth hole, the caterpillar holes and stuff add a different dimension of positive, negative space, for example, or, I'm only just starting with that. I definitely think that's going to expand into painting and, combinations of leaves, just different things, just anything on the forest floor right now. I mean, I always had this tendency to look down as a child. I was always the person, the kid who was finding $1 on the city street. And because I was always looking down, maybe it's an interiority, but now it's just everything and it's the right size for a watercolor, all these little things. And that acorn is really unique. It's this little phallic acorn. It's not it's culled from 1,000 other acorns, and this was the acorn, you know what I mean? So yeah.
We spoke a little bit too, I was sort of kidding, we're Walt Whitman and Leaves of Grass, but and you did attend Camp Walt Whitman, but do you think there's something in the American grain about your work? Are you a latter-day transcendentalist? And is this your Walden Pond where you're syncing up with nature and looking for that kind of innate spirituality in the world? Or is that my projection onto the work?
I do feel a real connection to nature. So I don't know. I mean, I want to demystify Walden, because he was 1.5 miles away from a major town and would go in 3 times a week. So, I don't know. And the whole, I feel so male. I was thinking about that after we talked, he was very much I like the idea of simplicity in life. And I think that that's something to aspire to, but I also feel it's not something you impose on other people as everyone should be this way. So I get a little bit put off, literally by maybe Thoreau, but I mean, yeah, I mean, there's just something amazing about being in nature. And I think a lot of artists have left the city, even though, you know, I consider myself a city person, but there's so much to connect with and get out of nature. So I do have a natural connection, but I'm not like extremely like when like Walt Whitman is so like, I feel like reading him is like giving you this huge pep talk. It like makes me want to go, he's so exuberant. And I think I'm like slightly more muted or something, but I feel like I do feel some of the things that he's feeling. And I like the idea of having a first person understanding of the world the way he does. So I would say I'm transcendental adjacent or something. I don't, you know.
We spoke a little bit about some of your influences. You're friends with Rackstraw Downs. You were friends with Sylvia Slay. You like Andrew Wyeth's work. Who else? But we were talking also, you say that the tantric painting is an inspiration for you. And I wonder how that might possibly feed, what form of tantric painting and how that might possibly feed into the work.
I mean, I feel like you understand tantric painting more than, you know, I do. I have I've seen tantric paintings and have a tantric painting book, but I feel like it's an equivalent. Like, I feel that I don't necessarily, like, you know, I think that there are things that you look to literally, like, I want to paint a fingernail, so I'm going to look at Hans Memling. And then there are things that you just feel a kinship with. And I feel when I painted that green spot painting, after, like, there is a devotional aspect, and I, you know, after like really looking at that for months, like 8 months or whatever, I feel like that there's an energy in like in looking at something for so long, and in the tantric paintings have that, even though the making is different. I mean, you have to be completely centered to make it, and then after that you really meditate on it and focus on it, and so it retains that like aura or energy or something from all the hours that it has been looked at, and the simplicity of its, you know, form and all that stuff. So I connect with that. I mean, it just occurred to me, and I was like, this is something that I connect with.
Great. Well, I think we should open this up to questions, and I just have one last thought too. As I was really trying to figure out why I love your work and find it so kind of mind bending, and I would have to say mind tickling. And I thought of especially with these last intimate watercolors, where there's the leaf on the skin, and anybody can almost feel that, you know, presence, and it's different in reality. I wonder, Nick, if we can screen Peanut very quickly, just to give you a taste of how these works are made in this.
Sure. Toby, I want to share too. I do have that other video if you'd like.
I think people should just go to, we could share the link to it and just go to it on Instagram on their own. I'd like to get some questions going here, but if we could screen Peanut, and then I could just kind of my last question / statement for Ellen, please. That'd be great.
Painting a peanut on a person is kind of like a hilarious enterprise. It's not square, so it's going to kind of roll off. So to try to get it in the same place every time was a challenge. And then I kind of used the landmarks of different molds to know when I had gotten it in the right place. And then I found a part of the body, which was the back, where it wouldn't slide off. I found the peanut I was at the dinner with my husband's family in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We were at a restaurant that had unlimited peanuts, which actually after a while becomes kind of tedious. Like, how many peanuts can you eat? So I was more looking at them. Doing that, I noticed or recognized that as a potential subject matter, which made it interesting to me.
Great. Well, I you know, there's a haptic quality to these intimate works, to all of your work, but you can almost feel these things on your skin. And I was thinking, what is this like? And all I could think of was AMSR, which is autonomous sensory meridian response. And it's a whole genre on YouTube, but it's people crinkling things, whispering in your ear, and it kind of makes your brain tickle. And I, you know, was thinking maybe this is some key, or at least in my personal key to your work, is that it's so intricate, so intimate. It's kind of incanting or whispering the presence of the things you paint in some ways. And anyway, what do you think about my crazy take on these things?
I think that I get personally, like I get, if there's that sensation for me, it's like the feeling of the softness of the brush hitting the paper. Like it feels like polishing the paper or something. When I'm making a watercolor, if I'm in a really good state of mind, it just feels very like pleasant. But I think that those things are more, I remember there was a film made about me, and, you know, it was a real struggle making this painting that was in the film, but then there was a screening and people afterwards were like, that was so relaxing. Like, I thought it was going to be really boring, you know, because it's just like, it just shows how long the painting takes. And it goes for a whole year where the painting's like barely changing. And people just thought it was like very relaxing to watch that, which I hadn't anticipated. So maybe there's an element of that for other people, and the potential of that, I don't know for me, but yeah, maybe only in the watercolor, mostly in the watercolors, I feel like. Feels like polishing the paper. Making a watercolor feels like you're polishing the paper somehow with the brush.
Okay, well, wonderful. Let's open this up to questions and see what other people are thinking and wondering.
Yeah, thank you so much, Toby and Ellen. So we've got some great questions coming in through the chat. Just a reminder, if anyone has any comments or questions, just drop those in the chat. Our first question comes from Stephen. Stephen, I'm passing you a mic now. Stephen, you should be unmuted now. Well, maybe I'll ask Stephen's question. So Stephen asked, I love the subtle emotive gaze. Do you think this is achieved through a slow creation of the paintings, making it a meditation? So Ellen, maybe if you want to comment on that.
I think that the process, there's like kind of like a deepening, like the more you look, the more you see, but then you have to kind of go in stages, because you see like one level of seeing, and then you get to that level, you put that down on the canvas, and then you see the next level and you go into it further. So maybe there's like a strength, like this real connection with what, for me, there's a real connection and understanding with the thing I'm painting, and then just like some sort of penetration or going into it that is achieved only over a long time, I think. So.
Well, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Meredith. Meredith, I am going to pass you a mic now.
So am I unmuted now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I guess I was curious what your work all seems to me a lot like drawing, even the paintings or the watercolors. I was curious what classes you really took in art school, or how much study of drawing you've done.
That's funny because I always thought of my paintings more as having a sense of being a drawing, but I never talk about that. And I like other work, like I like Mantegna, because I feel like his work is more closely related to drawing. But I started off taking figure drawing in my freshman year of high school. So I had, by the time I got to college, I had like a really strong foundation in drawing. And it wasn't until I was painting, but I started oil painting when I was a freshman in college, I think. So, and oil painting is its own thing. So yeah, I have a big foundation in drawing. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think for me, that really ties into your incredible power of observation. And I was wondering, you mentioned a little bit about in your childhood, you would come across a leaf or something and you'd be looking down or you'd be on the sidewalk. Where do you think it comes from? From that, or did you have something else in your background that maybe inspired it?
I don't know. I think that the process, I mean, in terms of getting everything, it's more in terms of getting everything in the right place. When I'm making the paintings, it's like, you know, like drawing the thing, like even if it's a tiny, minute section of a piece of bark, and then realizing it's in the wrong place and moving it and starting over again. And so like the process of making the paintings is probably more drawing than it is painting, you know, because I can't really commit to the painting. I'm sort of painting all along, but I it's more sketchy until I know everything is until I know something's in the right place. So I think that it's maybe that is retained in the painting.
They're really beautiful. I first saw your work out at Bellwether.
Oh yeah.
And you did a series of trees, and I was very taken with it.
Thank you.
And followed your work for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Meredith. So our next question just came in from the chat, and I will read it on their behalf from Ridley. They said, oil allows for working, adjusting, and reworking, and watercolor is so unforgiving in that way. Do you have to approach watercolor in a totally different way, or is your thinking / process similar?
I think watercolor is different. In some ways, it's more forgiving than you would think, but in other ways, I mean, once you lose the white of the paper, it's really dicey, you know, and that can. So I think that I tend to start over more, and it's, you know, if you're like kind of sculpting the thing you're painting, it always feels like it's harder to wrangle the watercolor. And I think that with the watercolor, I tend to try to like erase, like I use all these, like Old Holland is supposed to be really bad because it will lift, and Arches paper also has a really strong amount, a lot of sizing on it, so you can lift things. So I'm constantly putting things down and trying to rework them, pull them up. Like I look at Ang, like the decisive drawings, like you can't see any kind of movement, like of from what he started to where they're very decisive, and I'm very indecisive, and it's sort of like I guess I have to be very focused because, you know, in oil painting, when you lose focus, you can fix it. So, I mean, it has its challenges. So that's what I have to say about it.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from our very own Nick Bennett at the Rail. Nick, you should be able to turn on your mic.
Well, thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Toby. I'm really curious about, Ellen, how your compositions, how you sort of crop these images. And I thought it was interesting, the one torso image of the male, you were kind of like avoiding sort of body landmarks, like the nipple or another spot, to kind of make it this sort of ambiguous territory. But at any rate, I'm curious, sort of, how do you approach, beyond just that one example, how do you approach your compositions and cropping those images? And there's an interesting play with scale there. You know, there are very small things that can be quite big. So yeah, curious about composition and scale.
I think like I think I try to include what's needed. And if it's not necessary, then I don't include, like if you get an idea, if I can get an idea, the idea I want across in a smaller thing, then I'll go that way, because the additional example that a larger thing might provide might be extraneous. I mean, it's just very, like, you know, it's just a very specific, I think that what you include is a lot about what you want to say, you know, what you have to, what your painting says, you know. So like something that doesn't have any kind of landmarks becomes more of a thing than a person. And I was sort of interested in that painting you were referring to, but also like knowing that I was going to do this online show, which at first I was like ambivalent about in some ways, because I believe in seeing things in person. But then I thought, you know, these are things that are really overlooked, and some, you know, you can't hang something that's like an acorn, which is like this big, in a busy gallery or whatever, and expect it to get any kind of attention. Whereas here, it's like the moment for like the little acorn to shine, you know, because everything's the same size online. And so I thought it was fun to play with that and to make things really small, and see what happened with that.
Thanks so much, Nick and Ellen. Our next comment comes from Francesca. Francesca, I'm passing you a mic now.
Hey there, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Toby. I wanted to think a little bit more about the I am nature, because I feel like, man, you need to own that. I am nature, you are nature. Like this relationship between the way parts of the body are so equal to parts of nature. And yeah, I was just like, you were like, oh, that's such a male thing. But I'm like, I don't know. I'm just want to rethink that, or hear how you know, hear a little bit more about that.
Oh my gosh, you're like blowing my mind. Like, so you're saying like I am nature because I'm the one who is determining, who's making this combination of natural things, or I mean, I think that I don't know. I would have to think. I like the I am nature encouragement. So I'll have to. I definitely am imposing my view on these natural elements, but you know, I don't know. Like for me, like I am nature is always just so overblown, like the Jackson Pollock thing, that like I would always just say it more as like a like as a joke, you know. So I have to see if that's something that really I can really step into as and own.
I like that idea though, right? Of like,
yeah, I am nature. And then I'll be like, is this a painting? That's my fit. That's not other Jackson Pollock. Like,
well, I mean, I guess I'm interested in how you completely make, you say that the part of the body is the equivalent to this leaf or this, right? I mean, like, right? I mean, they have the same, they have the same importance or non-importance in your work. So.
Yeah, like that definitely they're all their own nature. So, but yeah, well, I'd like to talk to you, learn more about how to incorporate this potentially. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Our final question and comments come from our very own Fong. Fong, I'm passing you a mic now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Catherine. It's a very incredible conversation in following what you and I have been talking for a while, Ellen. But in reference to what Francesca just said, I was on the phone, I didn't hear the whole thing, but something in the effect of nature in reference to Pollock in response to, I think it was Hans Hofmann, when he was brought to Pollock studio. This is 1941. This is way before Pollock made his landmark drip paintings. So it's interesting when Hoffman looked at his painting all around and then encouraged him to say that you are very talented, but you must work from nature. And the response is that very emphatic, that emphatic remark, I am nature. And this is very remarkable because this is before he even undertook in reading fully Melville Moby Dick. In fact, it was each chapter every Saturday that was read to him because, you know, he couldn't read Pollock. So it was read to him by the poet Richard Howard, who was very close to both of them, particularly Lee Krasner. The whole story is very interesting because, as you remember, every last 4 years of his life, the drip painting, most of the painting, unless it's untitled, it was named after Melville Moby Dick. Even his dog was named Ahab, you remember? Otherwise, you have references to deep ocean, you know, ocean grayness, blue pole, and several other paintings. But I wanted to just remember the first few lines in Song of Myself, Walt Whitman. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me, a good belongs to you. You remember, Ellen?
Yes.
So what's my question? The question was that in reference to the sense of scale, which is interesting because Pollock needed that big, vast size of that, you know, of his painting in order to capture the sense of intimacy. I think it's the opposite. It's not quite the way that we take it for granted in the scale, therefore is big, you know? In other words, I think there's something about your sense of scale, which I prefer to think of it as psychometric sense of scale, because you are observing something very specific. In prolonging that sense of looking, you see things beginning to evolve into a very psychological, monumental sense of perception. And in other words, you couldn't say that simply Pollock's painting, because of its mere size, therefore it's more monumental than Joseph Cornell's tiny boxes, as long as you provide the prolonged looking in Cornell's boxes. I'm sure you get lost in it too, in that vastness of scale will amplify. But my question is very interesting. I remember once, it might have been in 2009, when I interviewed Brian O'Doherty. And some point I asked him very specifically why he got in so much trouble. This is 1975 when he published that very famous book. It's called American Master, The Voice and the Myth. You know, that was made into also a series of documentary on it. So in it, it included Edward Hopper, who's still alive then, Stuart Davis, Pollock, de Kooning, Rothko, Rauschenberg, Cornell, and finally Wyeth. Andrew Weil was included. And he got so much trouble and he was criticized by everybody in the art world at the time. At the time, touching Wyatt was like touching the third rail, you know, during that period. It's very interesting. And I asked him about it, why he would do that. And he say the country life have a different kind of mystery than the city life. You know, there's a certain kind of code that have its own danger and eeriness and has very harsh brutality. And I think there's a sense of mortality, there's a sense of decay that is so referenced directly to your own cognitive and emotional investment in how you deploy that one-to-one sense of scale, you know? And is that a question? No, it's not, it's just a comment. But I think that's why it makes your work so compelling. It's not just prolonged looking at the beautiful, intricate detail that you manage to paint it and put it in every tiny little 1/8 of an inch of the canvas. But because of the commitment, there is emotional commitment, what is called semantic differential, you know, differential. And I think that you treated that equal footing that is very close to Eastern philosophy, you know, Toby, that you mentioned earlier. Everything is being treated equal footing, equal worth. And I think that's exactly what it makes the painting so powerful and worth looking at it and coming back looking at some more. I remember including that painting of the arm in that show that I put it together for Mana Contemporary several years ago. It's called, you remember that show, Ellen?
Yeah.
Based on Tom Nikoski. What was it called? Something that, a paint that you can put under, tuck under your arm's length.
Reasonable
Size.
reasonable size.
Yes. So yours is super reasonable size painted. So
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Toby. Thank you.
Thank you, Fong.
Thank you. This is terrific. Thanks for the question too. Jason, do you have one? Jason Rosenfeld? Not today? All right, buddy. That's terrific. Kathy Bradford, you have any?
Don't put them on the spot.
No, I know. This is not an academic hello, we're just switching out to say hello. All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Fong. This has been great, Ellen and Toby. So now we use this time to usually move to our concluding poetry reading. We have a tradition of ending all of our events with a poetry reading, and today I'm thrilled to virtually welcome our poet laureate of the day, Forrest Gander, who has generously pre-recorded a special reading just for us today. So first I'll tell you a little bit about him as Nick cues up the recording. So born in the Mojave Desert in Barstow, California, Forrest Gander is a poet, translator, essayist, and novelist. He grew up in Virginia and attended the College of William and Mary, where he majored in geology. After earning an MA in literature, Gander moved to Mexico, then Arkansas, where his poetry, informed by his knowledge of geology, turned its attention to landscape as a foreground or source of action. And now he lives in Northern California with the artist Ashwini Bhatt. So that's a little bit about him. I'll drop some links in the chat, but Nick, if you want to cue up the recording.
This is Forrest Gander reading from Twice Alive. Obeyed. Can you hear dawn edging close? Hear soft light with its vacuum fingertips gripping the bedroom wall, an understated what? Exhilaration? Can you hear the voices, if they can be called voices, of towies scratching in the garden, and then the creaky, low, husky voice flecked with sleep beside you in bed? telling a dream slowly, as though in real time. And now, interrupting that dream, can you make out the voice, if it can be called a voice, of absence speaking intimately to you directly? I know you must hear it feelingly, a low vibration in your bones. For don't you find yourself absorbed in a next moment, beyond your given life? This is a series that runs through the book about lichen and intimacy, and it's the title poem of the book, Twice Alive. Microbiont, just beginning to enwrap photobiont, each to become something else, its own life, and a contested mutuality, twice alive. Algal cells swaddled in clusters. You take a 3-lens jeweler's loupe to inspect the holdfast of the umbilicate lichens, then the rock tripe lichens, then the irenic amanita mushroom, swarming with a kind of mite that has no anus, then the delicious chanterelles called trumpets of death. Supreme parsimony and drought lets lichen live on sporadic events of dew and fog, a velvety tomentum and a wet phallus. I crush oak moss between finger and thumb for its sweet perfume, persistent on your skin. When I touch your throat, so slow to evaporate the memory of seeing sunburst lichen on the sandstone cliff. Though crustose lichen relish decay, vagrant lichen go all hygroscopic, spores spurting out through walls split at the invagination fronts. But if herbivores eat wolf lichen, they die. And if carnivores eat it, they die writhing in pain, with the exception of mice. It is rarely possible to tell if lichen is dead or alive. So evening finds us at this wood's edge, where at a dead oak's base, shoestring rot glimmers, its luminescent rhizomes reflected from the eyes of a foraging raccoon that doesn't yet sense us. Air, ghostly and damp, clings as we step from our woods to look across the field toward the first lane of lit houses, their dull pewter auras restrained by wet haze. Cordyceps, the brown of your eyes softened with rain and remotely fluorescent, dissolve into slime after a few days. Whatever we thought we were following was following us, its intention, unlinked to our own. And now I'll finish with a poem that's also part of a series that runs through the book called Sangam Acoustics, which is based on tradition of Sangam poetry from southern India from about 2,000 years ago. This one is called Immigrant Sea. Aroused by her inaccessibility, he aches for more of her life to live inside him. Watching the breakers, standing so close, he can feel heat coming off her wet scalp. What is his relation to this person before him, so familiar and foreign? The way he searches out her face, he searches out himself. Gusts thrash crests of swell. Spring grasses twirl circles in the sand where they stand without speaking. She wants him to know it's all charged, even grass, positive, pollen negative. So when grass waves, it sweeps the air for pollen. He feels electricity all around, as though the wild drama of the coming storm were already aware of them, foreigners on this shore. Little sapphire blue flowers speckle the dunes. He wonders if he has let himself flatten out into a depthless sheet like escalator stairs, whether in the end he'll disappear underground without the smallest lurch of resistance. But when her lavish face turns toward him, beaming, the corners of her eyes wind wet, he yields to that excess. He reappears to himself.
Thanks so much from afar, Forrest. I feel like that was such a perfect way to close out today's conversation. And thank you especially to Ellen and Toby for your generosity today. Today was a wonderful, wonderful way to start the week. And thank you everyone who tuned in today for your questions and comments in the chat. As many of you know, the Rail is celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So if you enjoyed today's event, please consider making a donation to help keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Alex Hay and Amanda Glubisi. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from Nada Gordon. And I'll drop some links to that in the chat. And other than that, you should all be able to activate your microphones and say goodbye as you leave if you like. But yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Ellen and Toby.
Thank you.
Ellen.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thanks, Toby.
Thanks,
Congrats on the
Meredith.
show.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thanks, Toby.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.